world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, December 2nd, as you are listening to this. And of course, we've got a lot to talk about. Now, today there's a special election in Tennessee. Afton Bain is running to defeat Republican Van Epps. And don't know the outcome of that election yet. I probably won't be able to talk about it until tomorrow's podcast. So look forward to that, the results there. But the big story about this is the polling. The polling, and I don't trust polls, not entirely, because they can be skewed any which way, and they've let us down. Remember, the polls during the 2024 campaign had shown Iowa flipping to Kamala Harris. And it said she was going to win by like 1 or 2 percentage points, not huge and within the margin of error. But then Donald Trump not only wins, but wins huge here in Iowa and turns around and puts enough pressure that one of the best pollers in the nation, and this was one of the few times she had gotten it wrong, ends up ultimately quitting. It's just polls can be wrong, but if these polls are right, it's bad news for Republicans. Now, the polling is showing Afton Bain within 2 percentage points of Van Epps. And that's huge because this is a district Donald Trump won by 22 percentage points. So if that holds and she ends up still losing but within 2 percentage points of Van Epps, that's a 20-point swing. And it's something Republicans are scared of, right? Because this would be a safe district. And it's an off election. It's a mid election. It's a special election, not held within the midterms. It's not held on normal election day, which is typically the first Tuesday in November. We're in December. It changes things. Not having an incumbent changes things. But all of that being said, it just tells us that Republicans are scared of how this outcome goes. And you could see a lot of fallout coming from this election. And in part, we know that they're scared because Donald Trump is talking about it. He's out on Truth Social, and I'm going to get to his Truth Social stuff later on. But he's out on Truth Social, and he's pushing for Republicans to get out and vote today. Of course, he's endorsing Van Epps, which may end up ultimately being the one thing Van Epps doesn't want is the Donald Trump endorsement. Don't know how much that endorsement is worth anymore. Now that we've seen Donald Trump in action for the last 11-ish months, people are sick of Donald Trump and the performance and all of the stuff he's doing. And they're seeing the effect it's having on the economy and everything else. So this could be as big of a referendum on Donald Trump in Tennessee as anything. We'll have to see how this race plays out. Now, is the Afton Bain election, if she wins, is it going to change anything in Congress? Maybe. And we're talking about big picture here. So if Afton Bain wins, that brings the Democrats up to 214 seats. Now, Republicans currently hold 219. Doesn't change the majority. Then there's going to be a special election in Texas, a runoff election, I believe next month in January. Might be stretched out to February. I haven't seen the official date of that election yet. But it's going to be 2 Democrats. It's a Democrat versus a Democrat. There was like a field of 13 or 15 candidates or something like that in November. Nobody got over the majority, so the top 2 vote getters are going to a runoff. Well, they were both Democrats. That's a guaranteed Democratic pickup. Okay, so Democrats are picking up there. That brings them if Afton Bain wins, to 215. And then you have Mickey Sherrill's seat in New Jersey. That should be also a safe Democratic pickup. That brings them up to 216. They're within 2 seats of the majority, one of the narrowest majorities ever in the House of Representatives. But then we know come January 5th, Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to retire. So she's retiring. Of course, she waited till 2 days after she got her pension. I'm sure there's no coincidence there. And she's retiring from Congress. Okay, so she's gone. That brings them down to a basic 1 seat majority. Now her seat would go up for a special election by, I think, mid-March at the latest. And if the Democrats somehow pick up that seat, and again, it's going to be a safe red district, but you're dealing with an off-cycle election on a random Tuesday. It'll be probably a Tuesday in March. It may actually, I don't know when Georgia's primaries are for the upcoming election, but it could be tied to primary season. And more than likely, whoever the Democrat is going to be running for that seat in the primary is also going to run in the special election to replace her. So if the Democrat somehow ends up winning, well, that brings the margin to 218 to 217 for Democrats, 1 seat. Then it only takes one. It takes one defection, one Republican to switch parties and say, you know what, our party's not very popular. I want to get reelected. I'm going to become a Democrat. One of them to pass away and the Democrat pick up their seat. Think it's crazy? It could happen. We've had several open seats due to deaths this Congress already. That's not outside the realm of possibility, especially considering we keep electing, or certain parts of the country keep electing geriatric, older representatives who need to step aside. The people who have fewer years ahead of them than they have behind them. So again, that could happen. You could have somebody pass away. You could have somebody resign because they're finally up there in years, or you could have somebody, because there's been a lot of them, a lot of Republicans are seeing the writing on the wall, and they're saying, "Hey, we're probably not going to get reelected. I want a chance to run for something else later on. I want to, I maybe want a chance to rebrand my image, come back, maybe run for something state level, maybe run for governor of my state." We've seen several members of Congress do that. Some have wanted to run for Senate, so they said they're announcing a Senate run instead of running for the House. All kinds of things could happen. So what happens if a Republican walks away? And they may be looking at it even tougher depending on how Afton Bain does in this election today. Now, if the polling holds up anywhere near close, and if Van Epps doesn't win by at least 10 percentage points, I think you're going to see maybe some more Republicans say, I'm just not running. You might see one or two resign, something like that. Depending on when they resign, if they do, and depending on if they pass away or whatever, if one of those seats becomes open, it's going to depend because we would be getting closer to an election year. It depends on how close to that election it is. Some states say, well, if it's within so many days of the general, we are not filling that seat, and we're going to leave it open and just fill it at the general, hold one election, and the winner of the general election would fill out the last 2 months from November through January 3rd, and then take over the remainder of that term and just do one election to serve both, rather than electing somebody who would then have to turn around and re-campaign and hold a second election. They don't want to hold an election in, say, October if they don't have to turn around and then hold an election in November, something like that. So they're going to be looking at it. Republicans may walk away. Now, what happens if a Republican flips districts or flips parties, or resigns, or a Democrat picks up the seat or something like that? Well, Democrats, if all of the other pickups end up happening, including Marjorie Taylor Greene's district, And before they do that, we're sitting at 217 to 218 Republicans. One switch would end up ultimately flipping the party, or it would flip the script, and it would become Democrats in control. Now, it wouldn't be immediate, I don't think, but the minute Democrats become the majority party, and again, you could probably see Mike Johnson try to pull some games trying to prevent the swearing in of the new member. But see, now one of the rules for vacating the chair says it has to be from the majority party, and I don't know what would happen if there ends up being a 50-50 tie, if the Democrats could call for the vacating of the chair. But ultimately, once they get the new representatives sworn in, they would have the 218 votes, they would have the majority, and they would remove Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House, select a new Speaker, presuming it would be Hakeem Jeffries. And I know a lot of people don't like him right now, but he is the current party minority leader in the House. He would be the likely candidate for Speaker, but they may surprise us and pick somebody else. In fact, they may do something, even though she's announced her retirement, they may just say to give Nancy Pelosi a way out while they figure out what they're doing for next term, and that her be Speaker, just as a way of picking somebody that would be maybe less objectionable. I don't know, because she's done it before. But either way, Democrats are going to pick somebody to be Speaker of the House. Okay. If they get the majority, then they get the majority, they have the speakership, and then nothing Donald Trump tries to get through Congress is going anywhere. Now, once Democrats are in control, there are going to be all kinds of investigations into everything related to Donald Trump. And he doesn't want that. He is terrified of any and all investigations that could come his way, right? He doesn't want to be held accountable. He doesn't want to have to answer tough questions, and he doesn't want to have to end up dealing with everything they're going to look into. They're going to look into the National Guard being deployed to cities and them carrying out potentially unlawful orders there. They are going to be looking at the bombing of these boats in Venezuela, and if any of those were unlawful orders. Now, those investigations are already ongoing, and they are bipartisan, so that may not change anything. Both the House and the Senate have taken up investigations into what's going on in Venezuela. I'll talk about that in just a little bit, but that'll probably continue. You have investigations into Donald Trump and what he has done with the White House, and who's actually paying for it. Because Congress does control the purse strings, and they would be looking into, is any federal money being paid? Because if they're getting private donors for this, like they claim, there still should have to be a record of all of that going on. And, Donald Trump is going to have to answer tough questions. They're going to call people in who should be overseeing this and making sure things like this don't happen. Why did you approve it? Why didn't you approve it? What did you do to stop it? Those kind of questions. And Donald Trump is going to be embarrassed. There's going to be inquiries into ICE and all of ICE's activities. Pretty much everything this administration has attempted to do will be ran through the mud by Democrats once they are back in charge. And the big push by doing all of that is going to be trying to end up getting to a point where the Republican Party is exposed for all of the things they have already done, the things they have backed, the things this administration has done, even though a lot of us already know about it. Places like Fox News, OAN, Newsmax that skew right would have a hard time even ignoring these stories. And as these things become congressional inquiries, more and more people are going to actually find out about what's going on. And it's going to skew the opinion of the Republican Party going into the midterms if Democrats get control before the midterms. Now, is it going to happen? I don't know. Is it even likely? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. And that's the thing. And it all starts with Afton Baines getting elected today in Georgia. If that happens, that race is going on right now. Polls are open. And like I said, I won't be able to cover it till I get back to do tomorrow's podcast. But when I sit down to record that, I'm going to have the results. At least we should have the results in with a projected winner. And it's probably not going to look good for the Republicans unless Afton Bain ends up losing by like 20 points. Now, moving on, I talked about Pete Hegseth and these boats from Venezuela. And I mentioned this a lot, but I'm going to talk about it again. This is a huge story, and it's continuing to gain traction. Now, there is a bipartisan investigation going on in both houses of Congress. It's not typical that both houses take up an investigation separately into the exact same thing when it's a big story like this, but they both are. They're looking into everything surrounding uh, this whole event. Okay, and the big report about it is that one of the boats had 11 people on it. They claimed it was going from Venezuela to the United States, and I think this was one of the first boats that they sank. That they bombed it, and as it was sinking and it was on fire, a couple of survivors were dangling from the railing. That's according to this report. And they asked Pete Hegseth what to do, and Pete Hegseth said, "Kill them all." Now that's troubling if it's true, and it sounds like it might be. Though Donald Trump is trying to distance himself from it, saying, well, Pete wouldn't have said that, and I don't approve that kind of a message. I think Pete Hegseth is ultimately going to be a scapegoat here. That when it comes down to whatever these investigations in Congress come up to, that Donald Trump is probably just going to either ask for his resignation or fire him outright, trying to say, well, I don't condone this, even though he does. Just because Donald Trump likes to play to public opinion. And if something is going to make him look bad, he wants to have somebody else take the fall so he doesn't take the blame for something making him look bad. Now, Donald Trump is ridiculous that way, right? He doesn't believe, he doesn't really believe in anything, not really. He shifts his opinions based on whatever he thinks is going to get him more favorable reviews or favorable press or whatever. It's kind of ridiculous. Now, as far as this goes, well, this is a huge story. Pete Hegseth could be facing multiple problems. Now, some people are saying it could be considered a war crime. And it could, except for the fact that we are not in a declared war with Venezuela. And I don't know if we could be in a declared war with the drug traffickers if that is what is actually going on. Now, of course, we don't know for sure that these are boats that were running drugs. What they should have done, rather than just blow them up, because we are not in an armed conflict with the gangs, we are not in an armed conflict with Venezuela. What they should have done was simply let them get to the United States waters, track them with global GPS satellites, um, use other boats to monitor the locations or whatever. And once they get to U.S. waters, have the Coast Guard intercept them, search the boats, seize any contraband that was on there, and arrest and try these people in the United States. Done deal. But they didn't do that, right? Instead, they decided to be judge, jury, and executioner, just blow the boats out of the water and claim they were running contraband. Now, we have no idea of knowing if any of that was true, other than what this administration says. And that makes it very hard for us to believe because this administration says so many things that ultimately end up proving not to be true. So Pete Hegseth could end up being the scapegoat in all of this because Donald Trump may end up asking for his resignation. Donald Trump may fire him. He may resign on his own. Although I think that last one is a little less likely. Um, Now, some people are suggesting Donald Trump may pardon Pete Hegseth. Well, Pete Hegseth doesn't. He can worry about a pardon, sure, that would save him from criminal liability, but that doesn't save his job as Secretary of Defense. It doesn't. Why? Because one of the things you can't pardon for is impeachable offenses. Um, so they could still impeach and remove Pete Hegseth. Now, are the Republicans willing to do that? It depends on public outcry about the story and whether they think it is going to affect their reelection chances. I've talked about it before. Republicans, well, politicians in general, only care about getting reelected. That's their biggest thing. And they will sometimes not take up things that are in our best interest or that would help the country the most if they think it's going to affect their reelection chances one way or the other. So, do they ultimately move on Pete Hegseth? I don't know. But if they decide to impeach and remove Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump can't stop that. Because even though the pardon power is pretty much unquestionable, there are two things it doesn't work on. It does not work on state level offenses, and it does not work on impeachable offenses or impeachments. Why? Well, as far as state level, states have some level of autonomy, and it would have to be up to that particular state's governor to issue the clemency or issue a pardon, something like that. And then beyond that, as far as impeachable offenses, one of the reasons why impeachment doesn't apply for presidential pardons is there is no criminal or no punishment that's non-political in regards to impeachment. The only two potential punishments you can get is removal from office and barring from the ability to hold public office ever again. That's it. Those are the two punishments for impeachment. And what they so because there's no risk of, you know, any sort of confinement, no imprisonment. It's not going to be a capital case, at least on this matter. Uh, the president has no say and cannot pardon. In fact, it calls out in the pardon power, I believe. It's either in the pardon power or the section on impeachment, one or the other, in the Constitution. It says presidential pardons do not affect impeachments. So he can't prevent them from getting rid of uh, Pete Hegseth if they decide to do that. Now, if he doesn't pardon Pete Hegseth, what else could happen? Well, he could be facing federal charges. Now, probably not under this administration. But if there's never a pardon, when the Democrats are back in charge, there could be, because this is probably something that could lead to a murder charge. Um, and those have no statute of limitations. They can't run out the clock. Beyond that, and I don't know if they would do anything under this administration, but they could always, I believe, recall Pete Hegseth because he was an officer, even though he was in the National Guard. He was an officer. They could probably recall him. Same thing they want to try to do to Mark Kelly and recall him and put him on a court martial for his conduct. And that could come with penalties, including confinement in Leavenworth. Now, will they? Again, probably not until Donald Trump is out of office. But they go ahead and when it comes to all of it, there are things that Pete Hegseth is going to have to be worried about. He's going to have to worry about whether or not he ends up having criminal liability. He's going to have to hope that Donald Trump pardons him. And will Donald Trump? Who knows? Because Donald Trump is a wild card. Depends on if he thinks he can get something out of it. But one of the things, because if he does get a pardon, And yes, you can pardon him ahead of him being charged or convicted. You can do a preemptive pardon. Um, and one of the things that Donald Trump has to worry about is, does Pete Hegseth testify and sing like a bird and make Donald Trump look bad? Find out that maybe Donald Trump had something to do with these attacks, and did Donald Trump actually say the same thing Hegseth said? Were they in agreement? Well, if Hegseth is talking, Donald Trump may look bad in this whole deal, and you know, Donald Trump may want to prevent that. Now, he may prevent that by not offering a pardon, because when you are pardoned, you can no longer plead the fifth because you face no criminal liability for anything about that particular topic or about anything you've been pardoned for. So if they call him before Congress, he would have to answer. Now, with all that going on with Pete Hegseth and everything, it's just another big story. Now, we have another story coming out this month, and that's the Epstein files. They're down to a little over 2 weeks or so before they have to release the Epstein files. So they have to release the files in a downloadable and a searchable format. And Donald Trump is panicking about that. We know that. He doesn't want the files released. Is it possible that some of these other stories are coming out now to distract away from the files? It's entirely possible. I mean, it is entirely possible that he can talk to somebody inside the DOJ saying, hey, throw Hegseth under the bus, leak this out to the press, and, um, you know, we'll end up ultimately firing Hegseth, but it'll be better in the long run because it's going to get us distracted from the Epstein files. Maybe. I mean, I could potentially see him doing that. Donald Trump is terrified of the Epstein files coming out. He's terrified of public opinion turning against him. And he's trying to use us as a distraction away from how bad things are going with his administration. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if anybody ends up being a scapegoat for Donald Trump. He doesn't care about loyalty to anybody unless he gets something out of it. So by turning on Hegseth, if it takes us away from the Epstein files, it wouldn't surprise me in the least. Now, one of the things with this investigation, as they are looking into it, could the Republicans use this as a vehicle to get rid of Donald Trump? Depends what they find in the course of their investigation. Of course, if they find out that Donald Trump condoned murder and that he told Hegseth, make sure you kill them all, and Hegseth was following Donald Trump's orders. Now, following orders is not a defense that you can use. We've established that going back all the way into the 1940s with the Nuremberg trials. I was just following orders has not been an acceptable defense because you know when something is wrong, and as a individual person, you should have the courage to step up and not do something that you know is wrong. And I know that is easier said than done, especially in a command situation like the military. But, Pete Hegseth was Department of Defense Secretary or is right now. I still refuse to call him Secretary of War, and I will refuse to do that until Congress actually makes that official. But anyway, he, in his capacity, had the ability to tell Donald Trump, well, we can't really do that. If they are helpless, we can't do that. What we could do is just not do anything to save them or something like that. He could have found a workaround, but instead, according to this reporting, he just blew up the boat again. Now, how much have all these bombs and stuff cost us? I have no idea. A decent chunk of money, I'm sure. Well, ultimately, the Republicans could decide if they think it is something that would actually work in their political favor going into the midterms, especially we keep going back to Afton Bain and this election today. But if this election goes sideways for them, and they lose the Senate seat that was in a safe Republican district, or House seat, not Senate seat, I apologize there. If they lose this House seat, in a safe Republican district. Um, they may say, hey, you know what? This is a big rebuke of Donald Trump. His endorsed candidate lost and lost big. Um, we need to move away from Donald Trump. And then you add the story of everything going on with Venezuela. They may say, okay, well, public opinion's turning against Donald Trump with Venezuela and his blowing up of fishing boats. So we need to move away, and we're going to go ahead and decide to impeach and remove Donald Trump or 25th Amendment him or what have you. They could do that with this story. Less likely, in my opinion. I think the vehicle they use to remove Donald Trump is still going to be the Epstein files. When he is in the files, I think that is where it's going to come out that he is going to be removed by the Republican Party. I think they are going to have the votes behind the scenes. And once they know they've got the votes to remove him because he is in the files, that the House will impeach him. They'll hold a 3 or a 4 week trial in the Senate where they don't pull any punches. They let the impeachment managers, which would actually be Republicans, more than likely. Now, the Republicans may include a Democrat or two in that, and the impeachment managers are effectively the prosecuting attorneys for the House of Representatives. And they would bring in their evidence, and they would probably give them a wide berth to plead their case, especially if it was Epstein file related, in my opinion. And then ultimately, when it comes time to hold their verdict, I think they are going to vote to remove Donald Trump. That's just my gut feeling, that they are going to remove Donald Trump over the Epstein files because the MAGA base cares about the files. They do. We talk about it a lot, but it's true. They care about the Epstein files. So they will end up removing Donald Trump over the files and then turn around and say, okay, we got to move on to JD Vance. And I think they try to do it ahead of the midterms, trying to make JD Vance a sympathetic person, a sympathetic Republican, and to use it to plead their case to the general population that you need to give Republicans 2 more years in power with President Vance so they can still fix all of the damage caused by Republicans. They'll stop short of blaming Donald Trump for anything going on with the economy, but they'll say that they need to fix all of the damage caused by Democrats and Joe Biden, et cetera. They will still try to blame Biden for the economy and all of that, and that they are going to need time to fix it with a new person at the helm. But they'll also make that same case effectively if they lose the midterms, before they replace Donald Trump. And if they do, their case is going to be, well, Democrats had control of Congress, so you got to give us 4 more years of Vance plus control of Congress again so we can fix all the problems. Democrats didn't let us fix anything, except that their versions of fixing things just break it more, and they can't sell that to the American people. And as the older voters, the silent generation and the greatest generation, baby boomers, as they all pass on, because they're all getting up there in years, as they end up passing away, that's the group of people that would have bought that level of bullshit, right? You didn't need to bring out tons and tons of information and facts and strategy. Like the younger voters, the Gen Xers, the millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and beyond, they require more information, more proof, because we have embraced more technology. We've accepted that we can find anything quicker. We don't just accept things as they are. We go, okay, what can we do to make things different? And I think that reaches across party lines, but more so on the Democratic or the liberal side, but still. they don't accept things nearly as at face value, and they wouldn't accept just a bullshit, well, we can fix it. There would have to be some kind of a how involved. Okay, we can fix it by doing X, Y, or Z. Okay. So do Republicans move away from Donald Trump? I don't know. But they also may not have a choice. He's getting worse. His health isn't in the best of shape. And they may either have to 25th Amendment him. The Big Mac might get him. One of these days he may just not wake up. We don't know what's going to happen there. But it's evident that he is getting worse. Now, back in October, Donald Trump went to Walter Reed Medical Hospital, had his second yearly physical, which is unusual in itself. You don't typically have two physicals in a year, but he did. And by having two physicals, caused a lot of questions. Then he comes out, and of course, Donald Trump mentions it himself, and he says, well, I had an MRI, and doesn't tell us what part of the body is been scanned or what they were looking at or what they found or anything. Of course, he says it was perfect. It was just routine, best imaging he's ever seen, and that the doctor says, oh, you're in perfect physical condition. All of the normal things Donald Trump would typically say. Well, then he was pressured, and Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, after Donald Trump had said some things about him, comes out and says, well, we know we had the MRI. Release it. What did they look at? What were they looking at? Why were they looking at it? What did they want to know? Well, Donald Trump got pegged behind a corner, or got cornered by a reporter, and basically said, well, yeah, I'll release it. I got nothing to hide. I don't know what body part they were looking at, but we know it wasn't my brain because I took a cognitive test and I aced that. And I talk about it a lot, but he wasn't talking about an actual IQ test or any sort of cognitive test. Well, it was a cognitive test, but it wasn't an aptitude or an IQ test like he likes to claim. They probably told him that is what it was because it is called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Based on the way he has described it, it is the Montreal Cognitive Assessment where they do things like association. They have like numbers 1 to 10, the letters, A through G or whatever, and you're supposed to write, like, connect 1 to A, 2 to B, those kind of things. And see if you could actually just make those connections. And then they give you like 5 words. They come back to you in 10 minutes and see if you remember those 5 words or how many, and if you remember them in the right order. They show you three pictures, and they don't even want them to be very specific. Like some of the ones I've seen have got like a lion, an elephant, and a camel, and that's all they care about. They don't care if you put like African lion, or is it an African or an Asian elephant, or is it a one hump or a two hump camel? They don't care about that. They don't care about how specific. Just simply, can you identify them? And then they ask you other questions. Now, he has said the last couple of questions got really difficult. Like he was struggling. One of the other things they ask you to do is to draw a clock. And it's not for your artistic ability to see how well you can actually draw. It's just everybody should, maybe the younger folks now, maybe this is one they will not include because analog clocks are becoming a thing of the past. But to draw an analog clock face, and then they ask you they'll give you a specific time, and they want you to make the clock point to that specific time, just to see how close you can get. Now, they don't care if you can draw a perfect circle. They don't care if it is the most artistic. What they're looking at is, do you get the number placement approximately correct? Can you actually draw the time kind of correct? And do you realize that you're having trouble? If you're not getting it there, does it look correct to you, even if it's not correct, etc.? Now, I know people who have taken it because they have had issues and didn't realize that they had a problem drawing that clock face. But it's all about getting an idea for where the person is. Now, Donald Trump has talked about taking multiple cognitive assessments, which tells us they have reason to believe that his health is slipping, that his mental acuity is declining. And that is a scary thought for somebody who is in the most powerful position in the country. Now, I had somebody come to my comments on YouTube, and it was a Trump humper, and said, "Well, why do we think we deserve to know his medical history, and why should we have anything? People have medical privacy. When you are the president of the United States, you don't entirely have that medical privacy anymore. When it comes to now, if this was on something completely unrelated and he wasn't showing any signs of problems anywhere, maybe they wouldn't be pushing. But the fact of the matter is, he is showing multiple signs of battling some kind of dementia or other event. And because he is leading the country as president, that does matter. It changes things, right? Yes, he should have some access to medical privacy. But the whole point is he is the president. We need to know, as the American people, we should be able to know, is the president mentally capable of carrying out the job? And if he's not, why aren't the guardrails that are already in place to remove him being used? And we need to be able to hold the party that could do that, which is right now the Republicans, accountable for not doing that. Now, the reason I know this was a Trump humper is they turned around and said, like, at first I couldn't tell they were a Trump humper in the comments. They said, well, people have medical privacy. And, why should the president be any different? And then they turned around and said, well, I mean, you didn't ask the same questions when Otto Penn was in office. And the minute they said it that way, I knew they were talking about Joe Biden and the story that the only person pushing and the only evidence that this was actually true is coming from Donald Trump, that Joe Biden pretty much signed everything with the Otto Pen and he didn't sign a thing. Now, there's no evidence of any of that. And there's no evidence that he didn't know if he did use the Otto Pen for certain things, that it wasn't knowingly, right? That he said, go ahead and use the Otto Pen. Now, for somebody with Joe Biden's advanced age, it is entirely possible that if he didn't think if his hands were shaky that day or whatever, and he didn't want to have a shaky signature, that they just use the Otto Pen instead. It's possible. I'm throwing out a scenario where that's logical. But the fact that these Republicans are using that, this is their new talking point, probably, that we're going to start hearing, because they all repeat the same talking points, in part because a good number of them are nothing but bots. That, well, he should have medical privacy. We don't need to know all that. Yes, we do. If they are concerned about congestive heart failure or something like that, where he may just have a heart attack one day and, there's a problem there, we need to know. If they're worried about him having dementia, we should know, because like I said, there are guardrails in place, and the party responsible for using those guardrails is the Republican Party. We need to know what they are doing to actually use those guardrails and protect us from having somebody who is unqualified be in a position where they can do it. And by unqualified, I mean not in the right mind. If he is clearly suffering from dementia and having multiple problems, they need to use those guardrails and remove him. But see, they're waiting for either something where they can use, like I was talking about earlier, using the Epstein files, because a big chunk of the MAGA base wants the files released, that they could maybe use that as a vehicle to get rid of Donald Trump and not lose voter support. Or they're looking for something like it to be very obvious, very public, where they don't have a choice, whether he has a very public stroke or a heart attack or something, like on stage where it's very clear, or he has some kind of an event that incapacitates him where he can't speak, where he wouldn't be able to go out and give interviews or post on Truth Social or something like that and burn the Republican Party down as it goes. They are afraid that he will torch the Republican Party down as he leaves if they turn on him. And they may have to just accept it that he's going to do this and do it for the good of their own party, so they have a chance of rebranding going forward and being able to ultimately shift their focus and get away from the MAGA movement. Because I think once Donald Trump is out of the picture, the MAGA movement is dead, and they're going to have to go back closer to the center, closer to centrist Republicans, just to have a chance at staying relevant. Now, I mentioned Donald Trump and Truth Social. And last night he was up till all hours of the night. He spent 3 or 4 hours posting almost nonstop on Truth Social. And he went a little crazy. I mean, he was posting at a pace of about one a minute there for a while. And we know he doesn't read a lot of the things he was reposting and sharing, because there was a lot of articles that were favorable for Donald Trump that he was posting, tearing down other people. But he had some of his own original posts in there as well. Of course, he was out posting, pushing for support to go out and vote for Van Epps against Afton Bain, knowing that race is going to be very, very close. Now, he was saying things like she hates Christianity, talking about Afton Bain, that they want transgender for everyone, want men and women's sports. None of those things are true. And just turned around, said open border. It was all of the dog whistles that he normally uses against every Democrat. But he's terrified. Well, he was talking about that. And then he posted some videos about Melania Trump. He posted the same video 3 times. Tells you exactly that he doesn't remember what he's posting. He doesn't pay attention to what he's posting. He doesn't read what he is posting. If he thinks it looks favorable, he's just out there pushing content. He was out using all of this for hours at a breakneck pace in the middle of the night. And he does this a lot, where he's up to all hours. And that is something called sundowning, where there comes a point in the night when if people who are suffering from dementia or other issues like that, where once they're awake, they're basically up. And some of them are actually more alert after the sun goes down than during the day. They get their nights and days flipped, basically. And that might also explain why Donald Trump is sleeping a lot more during these events. They hold these events, and you catch him out dozing. I've talked about it before. I think I just mentioned it yesterday, actually. He was doing a press event with Pete Hegseth, and once the attention was off him and Hegseth was talking and stuff, he kind of zoned out and he dozed off. It reminded me of my grandfather. And in his later years, my grandfather was going ahead. He had Alzheimer's or dementia, and we'd go visit him and he'd doze off. Sometimes we'd take him to church services, and for as religious as he was, there were times he could not stay awake through the service. He tried, but he couldn't do it. He would, he would doze off, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for the bulk of the service, and he couldn't help it anymore. And I see that problem with Donald Trump, where once he's not the one speaking, once the attention's not on him, he zones out. And it could be that he, because he's not focused on what's going on, he's not actually actively listening anymore. That because he's not doing any of that, and because he doesn't sleep at night, his body says, okay, I don't need to be awake anymore. I can catch 20 minutes of sleep. I can catch a short nap. And he does that. It's entirely possible. But this ties into what I was talking about with his health. We need to know what they're looking at. If they're worried that he's got dementia, and that ties into his late night True Social post and him sundowning, that is a big story. We need to know, because of who he is, because of what position he holds, if those are things they are concerned about. And Donald Trump will do anything to avoid accountability. He uh, said he was going to release his MRI report, right? Well, they didn't do that. And go figure, he lied, right? He said he was going to release it. Well, Caroline Levitt was out, and if you saw the clip, um, it was pretty bad. I actually listened to what she said about it. And instead of releasing the MRI report or anything that sounded like it even came from a doctor, she released a summary of the doctor's report. And it said, well, everything was fine. He's perfectly healthy. His heart's fine, and it's as vital as ever. Um, and that, it was all perfectly normal, and it was routine. It was a routine MRI as part of a routine physical or something like that. It was a very watered down report and didn't tell us anything. But that wasn't releasing the actual MRI. It reminds us of Donald Trump during his first term when he got uh, that physical from Dr. Ronnie Jackson, and it comes out and says he's in the best shape of his life. He's 6'3", 235 pounds, and he's he's a perfect physical specimen in all of this, right? It sounded like something Donald Trump would have dictated. Same with this report. This report, the summary, sounds like something Donald Trump would have dictated to somebody to read. And he thinks we're stupid enough to accept it. That he can just say this and say, well, it came from the doctor. This is good enough. But it doesn't sound like the actual report. It is just a summary. And it doesn't give us a clear picture of why he needed an MRI, what they were looking at, or anything. Just that everything looked fine. Didn't even tell us why they were concerned and what, because sometimes they will do these advanced image testings and then turn around and say, well, we're going to do that, but because we're concerned about X, Y, and Z, then they do the test and it turns out normal. That's fine. But the thing is, with Donald Trump, we don't know why they were looking at it, just that, well, he claims everything was normal afterward, which tells me it's probably not normal, and they're probably definitely concerned about something. Donald Trump doesn't want us to know how bad his health really is, because then it would start the questions about, are you going to resign? Are you going to spend your last few years with family, or are you going to keep working at this very stressful job? He doesn't want to answer the tough questions. He doesn't want to deal with any of it, so he'd rather keep it private. And if it's as bad as what we're speculating, that he potentially does have, dementia or something like that, that's what they're worried about, or that he has had a stroke, he knows how bad it's going to be and how bad the press is going to be about it. And Donald Trump, if nothing else, has always been able to be a showman and talk about things, and spin it in a way that he can make himself look better. He's always been good at selling the brand of Donald Trump. Okay. Now, one of the last stories I want to talk about quick is the ballroom. And apparently there are some issues with this ballroom. Namely, some of the architects are saying, hey, we can't really make it as big as what you want. We shouldn't really do 90,000 square feet. That's going to be bigger than the existing White House, especially now that you've torn down the East Wing. We don't need to make it that big to hold the number of people for what you're saying you want to have available, and all of that. And they're saying, well, you should go with something smaller. And of course, Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. And he thinks he knows better than the architects. because he thinks he knows better than everybody, that he is the smartest person in the room. Just ask him, he will tell you he is the smartest person in the room. Well, this isn't the first time he's argued with architects about um, the size of buildings. Donald Trump has gone bankrupt 6 times, right? Maybe even 7. And at least 1 or 2 of those were casinos. He had the Trump Taj Mahal, and he had one other one in Atlantic City, I believe. And they went belly up. But why? Well, they had a plan. They looked at how big of a gaming floor and how many rooms to build and everything. They looked at the area, they looked at the market, they looked at everything and said, okay, for the area of Atlantic City that you're going to build, and how much revenue you could possibly get, et cetera, to make sure you're profitable. Your gaming floor should only be this big, and your hotel should only be this big. But Donald Trump knew better, and he went. I think he doubled what they suggested because he wanted to have the biggest and the shiniest hotel and casino out in Atlantic City. Had to be the best, right? But it was way above what the experts said he could financially make money on. And that if they built it as big as he wanted, that there would be tons of empty rooms. The gaming floor wouldn't be utilized nearly as effectively, and it would cost them a lot of money. But Donald Trump knew better. So what did they do? Well, they went with what Donald Trump said because ultimately he's the boss. And turned around, they went belly up because they built it way too big. And I believe the second casino he did that with had the same problem, way too big, and didn't listen to the experts who said, well, if you build something within this range, it may not be the biggest, the brightest, and the best, but it would make you a lot of money. And that wasn't good enough for Donald Trump. He had to have the biggest and the brightest, etc. So Donald Trump not listening to experts is par for the course. Now, I don't know if his ballroom ever actually gets built. If he doesn't live to see it completed, I don't know if they ultimately finish it. What could potentially happen is if he goes away, if the Republicans get rid of him or he passes on or whatever, that the Republicans very quietly say, well, the private donations aren't going to be enough to cover it. We're just going to use taxpayer money and we are going to rebuild the East Wing, something like that. Because that would be more favorable for the Republicans to just rebuild the East Wing. So they could do that. If it's not done before the Democrats get in office, one of the tests some of the Democrats are saying we need to put out there is that do they tear down the ballroom and rebuild the East Wing? I don't know what the answer is here. But if Donald Trump can't get along with the architects and they can't decide on even a size, that's going to delay it getting built. And it may delay it past the point when Donald Trump will no longer be president. Either past the point where he kicks the bucket, the Republicans remove him, or if neither of those things happen and he makes it to January 20th, 2029, he'd just be naturally out of office. Either way, the longer he argues with the architects over this design plan, the longer it is going to take for him to actually get it done. And he may not be there when it's completed, if it is ever completed at all. All right, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I will be back tomorrow where we will discuss the fallout from the special election in Tennessee, assuming by the time I record tomorrow's podcast that we actually have the results and we actually have a winner. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and I will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.